Welcome to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast with your host, Brandon Seigel. I'm a published author, speaker, entrepreneur, and private practice strategist dedicated to transforming the way that healthcare functions. This podcast is all about empowering you to create the change you want to see. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. So, Today's quick tip episode, we're talking about how to find that ideal private practice buyer. We're going to talk about statistics. We're going to talk about strategies. We're going to give you some facts. So without further ado, let's dive in. So here's some key statistics I want you to be aware of related to the private practice crisis. Only 42.2% of physicians work in private practices as of 2024. That's down from 60.1 in 2012. That means that physicians are leaving our private practice sector. That's impacting everything. For the first time in 2024, fewer than 50%, technically it was 47.4 of physicians work in practices with 10 or fewer physicians. Everything's getting smaller in that way. 127,700 U.S. physicians moved from private practice into a hospital or current employment in the past 5 years. That's crazy. What that means is that hospitals are taking over the way that health is delivered. The idea behind private practice is raising the bar, having autonomy over our healthcare system. And as physicians are leaving the field of private practice, we're losing out right now. So only 35.4% of physicians had an ownership stake in their practice. Only 35.4%. That was down from 53.2%. So what that means, just so we're on the same page, is like give or take 18% of physicians that owned private practices left their ownership. We're not getting enough new physicians wanting to be in private practice. CMS 2025 physician payment rule conversion factor decreased by 2.83%. Bottom line, things are getting tough. Now, when things like that get tough, what does that do for someone like me? Opportunities, light bulb on. We've got opportunities. Opportunities to acquire, opportunities to do something different, opportunities to change the landscape of healthcare as we know it. So the reason why practice owners are selling, here are the top 3 reasons why physicians are citing that they're selling their practice. Administrative burden, rising practice costs, stagnant payment rates. That's sad. We can solve those problems. But the reality is a lot of these physicians don't want to run businesses. They want to be doctors. If you want to be an entrepreneur and you're a physician, let's crack the code for your practice. Like it's there. I promise you. Stop giving up on it. And so I guess that's why I'm here. I love this puzzle, this business puzzle that changes the way that healthcare looks is possible. And I think you guys are exiting way too soon. But as you look for it, I need you to understand, here are the buyers right now that are taking up your practices. And I think part of the reason why physicians are leaving is because of who the buyers are. So the most popular buyer right now we're seeing, or not the most popular buyer, but a common buyer, are these private equity firms. Physician practice deals increased from 245 in 2019 to 535 in 2023. I mean, literally over doubled. Healthcare deal values rose 17.7% year over year in 2024. 73.7% of physician practice acquisitions were undertaken by a PE, private equity firm, between 2016 and 2020. Interesting. So something to recognize is that private equity is the roll-up model. So 97.8% of practices that underwent an exit were resold to another PE firm, a secondary buyer. PE, private equity, achieves multiple arbitrage through acquiring platform practices and building market power with add-on acquisition. So I want to just give you this picture, okay? Imagine an 18-wheeler flatbed truck, and imagine if you were to put 50 private practices on that flatbed truck. The flatbed truck is a practice that's jumbo that you build on, and then they just keep rolling other practices. So when you look at the PE model, and this is what I'm saying, even from an exit strategy standpoint, what they're doing is rather than waste the time of trying to organically grow the practice, they're growing the practice through acquisition in order to flip the practice, just so you can think with that. So we're seeing a lot of health systems and hospitals get in the buying market. The traditional employment models, joint venture partnerships, professional service agreements, and alignment strategies for physicians who prefer that. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of this. We're also seeing some strategic corporate acquirers like insurance companies, retail health entities, technology companies, medical device manufacturers. I mean, these are all buyers right now in the market. We're seeing also a lot of franchise models get in the game, especially in the urgent care game, and they're acquiring their market. So what's happening is we even have franchisors that are buying back their franchises, franchisors that are acquiring new practices to be under the franchise brand, et cetera. And so here are some strategic approaches I want you to think about when you're trying to find the right buyer. So first of all, we need our prep phase. So our prep phase is about financial optimization. Focus on EBITDA improvement. Bigger practices get higher multiples. Key factors we want to look at is practice growth, growth potential, operational efficiency, risk assessment, the employees that you have, the fact that they're employees they want to retain. So sometimes when you have fat salaries that are not sustainable, no one wants a fat salary. So I don't want to have to come in and change all of your employees' comp structures. So making sure you're optimizing the way you pay your clinicians, it's crucial. Risk mitigation, address key man risk, reduce the dependence on one single practitioner, really have a diverse delivery methodology, minimize pending threats to compensation and major anticipated expenses. Really make sure that this thing is dialed in. When you're identifying your buyers, I want you to do market research. I want you to engage with healthcare investment banking advisors who have relationships with PE firms. I want you to get a market of other practice owners. I want you to reach out to consultants like me and say, hey, who are the buyers right now in our market? What's going on? Um, Look in your neighborhood. Look at the last transaction that has occurred. Talk to a broker to say, can you run a report of all um, acquisitions or sales that have occurred in the last 12 months and who the buyers were? These are all part of that buyer identification component. And so we want to create competition among buyers to identify the most interested groups. We want to expect longer timelines compared to others because of healthcare complexities. When we're doing our deal, we want to look at the rollover equity. If we're rolling over equity, it's often a huge part since buyers need selling physicians to remain invested in post sale. So, what that looks like is if I'm a physician and I'm selling my practice, let's say I get $1 million for my practice, they want 500K to roll over to the investment. 500K I cash out, 500K goes into that next investment, and I have to wait until that takes a turn to be able to cash out that. So maybe it takes another 5 years for me to cash out. That's why I say don't wait for retirement. When you're looking, also recognize that payment terms are everything. Buyers adopting strategies with lower upfront cash payments right now, extended payment terms. Some are using promissory notes with minimal interest but extended payment terms. So just recognize all those pieces because they affect it. Here are some red flags that I want you to avoid. First and foremost, I want you to verify your buyer's track record and financial backing. When I'm a serious buyer looking at something, that broker is asking for proof of funds. Understand exit strategy timeline. Assess the risk associated with achieving target returns given limited exit options. Look at the operational compatibility, culture fit with practice values, plans for staffing and operations post acquisition, technology integration requirements, etc. And so right now, like I'm in the acquisition market. In my acquisition market, I'm looking for practices that fall in a certain size. They're all W 2 employees. They use specific EMRs. They're in specific states that I want to grow into. And then it's plug and play. So this sounds funny, but in some cases, I'll pay 20% more for a practice that's already in the EMR I want. That's pretty cool, right? Just thinking with that. So focus on purchase price adjustment mechanics, sufficient representations, and warranties. We want to make sure we're negotiating in the right way. I always say start with the multiplier and then go back and have the EBITDA evaluated. It's easier to get third-party advice on an EBITDA than it is on a multiplier. So it's like, hey, let's assume my EBITDA is between 600 and 800. Let's just assume that right now. What's the multiplier? We're at a 6.5 multiplier. And I'm like, can you give me 7? Yeah, we'll give you 7. So we already know we're on 7. They're going to try and beat up my EBITDA now because I just moved them from 6.5 to 7 multiplier. On that EBITDA, I'm going to bring in 5 different audits to get me my shared agreed upon EBITDA. So when we're looking at regulatory and compliance considerations, we got to look at due diligence. We got to look at change of ownership for any Medicare, Medicaid programs, certificate of need transfers, state attorney notifications. We need to look at the employment considerations of staff protected by transfer of undertaking, protection of employees regulations, the TUPE. We need to consider who bears responsibility for pre-existing employment claims. We need to know who's responsible for every single piece of documentation prior to the acquisition. So if I'm buying your practice, I don't want to touch anything before I owned it typically. So all active patients, I take on their note responsibility. Everything prior discharge patients, that's on old ownership. That would be part of my negotiation tactic, just so you know. So here are some key takeaways. Private practice ownership continue to decline. It's making strategic exits increasingly important. Buyer diversity, multiple buyer types exist beyond private equity, each with different value propositions. There is a value optimization component. Professional representation increases multiples by an average of 23%. And by that, I mean having a broker, having someone who knows the market. I'm tired of brokers that don't know the market representing you. Get a broker that knows the market. Timing matters. Current market conditions favor sellers with improving financing and buyer competition. And then preparation is critical. Understanding your EBITDA, understanding the factors buyers use to calculate multiples is essential for maximizing your value. Did you know that private practices have defined a detailed ideal buyer profile, including buyer type and financial capability, completed sales 27% faster compared to those without a targeted buyer strategy? That was from Medical Economics. So, inspired by the great Seth Godin, seek an ideal buyer who sees your business as part. Together, you'll write the next chapter of its enduring success. Thank you for tuning into this quick tip episode of the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. Don't forget, like us, subscribe, write that 5-star review, and connect with me because together we can thrive, not just survive. Thank you for tuning in to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. I'm incredibly grateful to each and every one of you. Exciting news. We're now available everywhere, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts to YouTube or anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts. So watch, listen, and reach out. If you love this episode, please drop a 5-star review. It truly means the world to me. Are you looking for more ways to elevate your practice? If so, now is your chance. Reach out, go to my website, or email me at brandon@wellnessworksmp.com. And remember, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.